Hello, and thank you for joining this session today. My name is Steve Valvasori. I am a solutions consultant with the unstructured data team at Dell Technologies, and I'm actually local in Toronto here. I've been in the storage industry for around 20 years. I've been a customer, I've been a Unix and storage administrator, and I joined EMC back in 2006. And I went off for a little while in 2012, and I came back to rejoin Dell EMC in 2015. So we're going to talk today about unstructured data. We're going to talk about PowerScale and what you can do to help manage that data. Unstructured data is one of the fastest growth data types that we've got in the enterprise today, and so it requires special care to be able to keep up with the demand of unstructured data. We also find unstructured data out at the edge of our data centers. So a lot of times we've got IoT devices out at the edge that we want to be able to run analytics on. So we've got to manage unstructured data out at the edge. We sometimes need to bring some of that data, often pre-processed, back to the core. And then we need to run further analytics on that data within the core. And sometimes when we want to archive or for special purposes, we also need to push that data out to the cloud. So PowerScale is a solution that will allow all of that to happen and allow you to manage your data in a very simple and very seamless manner. So let's take a look at that. So if we take a look at your enterprise's data, a typical enterprise has many, many different workflows in it, and a lot of different places where data is coming into and needs to be saved onto a storage array somewhere. And if we look at that data, about 80% of that data is actually unstructured. So, you'll notice what went away there was the databases, some email, some of the virtual things like virtual desktops. Those are not unstructured data. That would be considered structured data and should be stored and handled differently than your unstructured data. But from an unstructured data perspective, we can look at typical IT workloads such as file shares, home directories, general archive. Video surveillance is a really good example of unstructured data. And there's also a lot of typical production workloads that we see our customers using PowerScale for. In the media and entertainment space, we do a lot of work in the life sciences space with genomic research, particularly the energy and manufacturing markets. And then perhaps even more interesting sometimes, or sort of more top of mind right now are the emerging workloads like artificial intelligence. There are so many customers now investigating artificial intelligence and the way that they can use all of their IoT devices to create things like smart factories. Right. So we're going to talk today about how we can store that unstructured data and how maybe we can drive some more value out of that data to be able to run analytics on it. As we all know, the data in your enterprise is growing exponentially, right? So it's really no surprise. And the data that's growing is the unstructured data. Typically, structured data sets aren't growing at nearly the rate that the unstructured data sets are today. And a lot of that is because the unstructured data is coming from many, many different sources. And sometimes those sources aren't predictable. I work quite a bit with police departments, and it's an example of an unstructured data source that they often don't know how quickly that data source is going to grow because they're often bringing in data from outside of their organization. So having a simple and scalable solution, something that scales very easily and is very flexible to use, is really, really important. So introduce PowerScale. So PowerScale runs OneFS software. In the past, it was called Isilon, and there still are Isilon nodes. But what it provides is simplicity at any scale. So we can start these clusters as small as 7 terabytes, and we can grow them out into the multiple petabytes. So these clusters, they're true scale out NAS clusters. So they perform file and object. They don't do any block, but they provide this scale out architecture that's up to 252 nodes. Now, you don't need to grow your architecture to 252 nodes. Lots of our customers start as small as 3 or 4 nodes in a cluster. And even that in a 3 or 4 node cluster, you can be 7 terabytes up to around 750 terabytes. And that's in a 1 to 4U kind of form factor. So it's a very, very dense platform, and it allows you to scale massively when you need to. We enable our customers to put their data really anywhere they want, right? So unstructured data on PowerScale can sit in the edge, and some of our smaller node types can sit in the core in sort of the larger node types, or possibly the archive node types, and it can also be pushed out to the cloud, extending that same file system out into either native cloud or into on-prem cloud solutions such as ECS. And then on top of that, we provide our customers with intelligent insights into their data. So we give them the ability to look at, number one, the performance and scalability of the system, but we also give them the ability to go into their data, scan all of their unstructured data, tag it, and then be able to act on that data. Now, Isilon or PowerScale is not a new platform, and I think that's important for a lot of people to understand, that it's a very trustworthy platform that over 17,000 of our customers are currently trusting. Gartner also sees it as a leader. I guess for the last 4 years, we've been in the file and object quadrant in the top right-hand corner, which is where you, of course, want to be. So Isilon started in 2003. It was acquired by Dell EMC around 2010, and actually by EMC in 2010, and then in 2016, of course, Dell acquired EMC. So the platform's been around for quite a while. It's gone through 6 iterations of hardware. So we don't change hardware very often, but we continue to innovate on the hardware side and make sure that we're best of breed from that perspective. And the most exciting thing that's come out lately is that we're now using Dell PowerEdge servers. So that's helping build us towards our software-defined goal in decoupling the hardware from the software. So today, PowerScale is still an appliance model, but we are, with the PowerScale or with the Dell servers, we're now able to sort of decouple the hardware and the software, which is really quite exciting. So we started 2003, 6th generation of hardware, and we're also in our 9th generation of OneFS, which is the software that runs on Isilon. So not a new platform by any means, and it's also a platform that is continuing to innovate within Dell. So if we look at the heart of PowerScale, it's really OneFS. So OneFS is the software that sits on top of the hardware and makes it perform all of its magic. So OneFS supports 8 protocols today, right? So it supports SMB and all the flavors of. It supports NFS and all the flavors of. It supports FTP. You could use it for data ingest. It supports HTTP access to your data. It supports NDMP for traditional style backups or integration into your backup environment. It supports HDFS, the Hadoop file system, which is really quite interesting, because if you were going to run big data analytics with a Hadoop cluster against your existing data sets, you could simply point a compute Hadoop cluster at your data to the one where it resides on PowerScale. You don't need to build up a separate standalone Hadoop cluster that has disks in it, and then you don't have to do those ETL jobs that move your data from an existing data platform where you typically store the data over to your Hadoop cluster to do the analytics. So you can run it directly against the Isilon data. So that's actually a very interesting use case, and it saves a ton of time for our customers and makes their lives a lot easier. And in case you have any custom dashboards, we expose full REST API access to the cluster and the data on the cluster, and so you can write custom REST commands or calls to be able to either configure the cluster or to be able to pull performance data out of the cluster to see what's going on. And we have customers that use, say, Grafana to create their own custom dashboards through REST API calls to be able to see what's going on within the cluster. So very, very flexible, which allows us really to adopt all of the different types of unstructured workloads. I have customers that use almost every protocol all in the same cluster, and you can access the same data from all of these protocols simultaneously. So there's no restrictions from that perspective. So you could bring a file in through FTP. You could be running reports for people through SMB on Windows servers, and you could have applications accessing that data through NFS, say maybe the applications run on a Linux host. I actually have a customer doing exactly that same thing. So it's a very flexible architecture that really doesn't have any limitations from the standpoint of storing and making use of your unstructured data. From a hardware perspective or a deployment perspective, we can deploy on the new PowerEdge servers. So right now there are 640s that we can deploy onto, and that's the F200 and F600 node type, and we'll talk in a second about the nodes. So that's what was just announced in June 16th. We announced these two node types, so they're very exciting. We can deploy on Isilon, which is the platform that most of our current customers are familiar with. And we can also deploy out into the cloud. So we can deploy in a multi-cloud environment where we're right next to the compute in Azure, Google, or AWS, or we can be deployed natively through Google, where all of the billing and provisioning happens right from the Google interface. So very, very cool and very flexible deployment methods. So if we take a quick look at the different node types that are available. So OneFS is the software that runs across all of these nodes. It's a single file system that's going to run across any of these solutions, right? Across the different types of nodes and across also the cloud. So it's one file system, one namespace across all of these environments. So we've got nodes that are everything from all flash. We've got NVMe. We've got our hybrid nodes that are very high performance, but also very very large from a capacity standpoint. And we've also got archive nodes. So if we look at an A2000, we can fit 4 nodes in 4U and have about 750 terabytes of usable capacity in that 4U capacities or 4U rack space. So it's a very dense platform as well. So often our customers might have an H500 hybrid node for their production data and an A2000 for their archive data. And then we'll use smart pools, which allows you to set policies within the cluster to automatically move the data from one node type to the other when time is right. So say if a file is 90 days old and you're not going to be accessing it anymore, then you could set your policy to automatically move it to a different node type. And again, when you do this, the file stays in the same location on the file system. So the applications and the users don't see that anything's moved. It's just simply moving it in the background so the blocks are sitting on the appropriate tier of storage. We can extend that functionality out to the cloud as well. Take a quick look at the architecture of Isilon. As I stated before, Isilon supports up to 252 nodes in a single cluster, single file system, and single namespace. We connect all those nodes together through redundant links to inter-cluster communication Ethernet switches. And then on the front end, every node has ports that go up to the network, to the customer network, which allows your clients to access your data through, again, multiple different types of protocols. What's interesting here about Isilon is that it's a true scaled environment. So every time you add a node into the cluster, that node adds CPU, it adds memory, it adds capacity, and it adds network bandwidth. So this is very important, and it's very different than, say, a scale-up architecture, which is a more traditional architecture that has a pair of nodes that do all of the compute, and then you add disk shelves on top of that as you grow and as you add capacity. The big difference is when you have a scale-up architecture with the 2 nodes and the disk shelves, the performance is there from day one, but it's never going to get any better. Sure, you're going to add some spindles, but you're not really going to be able to extend the performance of that storage array. In contrast, scale out allows you to add capacity, and every time you add capacity, you're actually adding performance to the cluster as well. And this is very important, as we said, with the unpredictable nature of unstructured data. It's very important to know that as you add capacity to your cluster, say you need to grow it from 300 terabytes to a petabyte, you're going to significantly increase the performance of that cluster at the same time. When we take a look at the core strengths of OneFS, we've talked about scale. I mean, it literally is up to 252 nodes and up to 50, 60 petabytes of usable capacity. And these are legitimate numbers. These aren't just numbers that we've come up with from a marketing perspective. These are tested numbers where we've tested clusters up to this capacity or up to this scale. And the management of the cluster from a 4-node cluster to a 200-node cluster is exactly the same. There's really no difference whatsoever. So it's a very easy to scale platform. What we also do is when we add nodes into the cluster, this has to be easy. It has to be non-disruptive. So, say today you start with a 4-node cluster and tomorrow you want to grow by, say, a pair of nodes. When you add those 2 nodes into the cluster, within 60 seconds, that capacity is going to be available in the file system. You didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to extend an aggregate. You didn't have to create a new line. You didn't have to decide on a RAID type. There's really nothing to do. The capacity is immediately added to the file system. And in the background, we're going to start an auto balance task, which is going to take the data that existed on those 4 nodes you had and spread it across all 6 nodes. So now all of the data in the cluster is going to be able to take advantage of the performance of the entire scale of the cluster. So this is very important. We're also very resilient in this fact that we can support multiple node failures. So depending on the size of the cluster, you can support 1, 2, 3, or 4 complete node failures within the cluster and still be up and running, serving data, and your applications won't even notice that anything has happened. We're also just newly added in DevOps capabilities. We're now, you can add us into Ansible automation. So we're integrated with Ansible. And we also support the CSI standard for adding storage with Kubernetes. So we can be a persistent volume within a Docker container, which is very exciting. And we've had tons of customers asking for that capability. So from a layered applications perspective, we put all the enterprise data services on top of all of that Isilon goodness. So, smart pools we talked about, being able to set up policies to be able to, move your data around the cluster to the right tier. We also add a bunch of other data services like asynchronous replication, snapshots, quotas, and these things all operate at a very granular level. Again, because of the way that Isilon works, and because of the fact that we're doing our data protection at a software level, all of these applications or these data services can access and be controlled at a directory level and often at a file level. So you're not taking a snapshot, say, of an entire LUN, or you're not replicating an entire LUN. You specify exactly what directory and what files in that directory you want to be able to replicate or take a snapshot of. So the granularity of that is massive and makes managing your data much easier. From a connectivity standpoint, we have Smart Connect. And so you might have thought to yourself, when I was telling you that we could support 252 nodes, well, how do we manage that? I don't want to, give out, the IP addresses for 252 nodes to all my clients and make them connect to a different node. And the answer is you don't need to. You simply delegate your DNS records to the Isilon cluster. And based on the policies you set up and the load balancing policies within the cluster, we'll hand out the IP addresses to your clients. So we'll make sure that your clients are evenly balanced across all of the nodes in the cluster. So really, Dataiku is another application that sits outside of the cluster and can manage and report on all of the unstructured data in your environment. So you simply set it up, you allow it to scan any file or any object platform within your environment, and then you'll be able to custom tag data that it discovers, and then you'll be able to produce very insightful reports to be able to, across your entire environment. So say you have, one application or workflow that is across, maybe it's got some data in PowerScale, maybe it's got a little bit of data in ECS, maybe it's got some data in some other third-party platform, or maybe in the public cloud. You'll be able to consolidate all that and get a view, a holistic, one-pane view of exactly the data that application is using. You can also use that information to move that data from the file to the cloud, from the file to object, and also from object back to file. So it's a very powerful piece of software that allows you to understand what's within your unstructured data environment and be able to act on it. So that's sort of, you sort of have it there, right? The whole structure. PowerScale allows you to go from the edge and work at the edge, run analytics at the edge, allows you to bring that data back into the core and run further analytics on it, or share that with other applications and other workflows. And also allows you to push data out to the cloud, either from a DR perspective or archive perspective, or even just, primary data perspective. Underlying all of this is OneFS that provides all of these capabilities, and the data services that OneFS provides to help protect your data. And then on top of that is Data IQ and Cloud IQ that provide insights into your data and also into the cluster to enable you to manage your environment simplistically. So that was all the slides I had today. I mean, if there's any questions you have from that, please put them in the chat or come visit our booth. We're now going to take a look at a video that's a customer of mine, Nature Fresh Farms, and they're very interesting in the fact that there's as much technology in their greenhouses as there are plants. And so it's a very interesting use of Isilon and recently PowerScale to go out to the edge in their environments. And they're going to talk a little bit about that and explain how PowerScale and Isilon have really simplified their environment and really allowed them to take their growing operations to the next level.
Hi everybody, I'm Dave Vellante. I'm a longtime industry analyst. I'm also co-CEO of SiliconANGLE Media, home of Wikibon and theCUBE. And I'm very excited to be here at this virtual event. Let me share with you what we're going to do today. First, we're going to talk to a really cool customer. It's an example in smart farming. We've got IoT, we've got data-driven, we've got AI. And then we're going to bring in Caitlin and Travis, and we're really going to unpack the news and the announcement details today. So with me to start off is Keith Bradley. He's the Vice President of IT at Nature Fresh Farms. He just sent me some awesome vegetables. Thanks for doing that, Keith. Great to see you.
Yeah, great to see you too.
Let's start with your role. Talk about your role, and let's get into a little bit about the company.
Okay, so my role is basically all the data management and discovery of everything between the edge, the core, and getting it back out to the growers and to analyze what we do. So we basically have about 200,000 IoT sensors without our 160-acre range, and we pull that back and analyze it and do all kinds of cool stuff with it and make sure we know how to give you guys better tomato, pepper, and cucumber.
That's so cool. So you're a smart and instrumented grower. Talk a little bit more about how you're using IoT and how that's really different from a conventional approach to farming.
So for us, like IoT, like we control our environment top to bottom. So everything within the greenhouse is controlled. How much irrigation the plant gets, that you can see right behind me here now, how much light it gets. We measure the nutrients going in, the nutrients going out. So we adjust that on a day-to-day section. And we also basically analyze the weight of the vine to know when the plant is awake and asleep. Basically, every part of that plant's life is recorded, and we use every chance we can to increase the yield from that single vine.
So I know from looking at your website, you guys have a lot of different data sources. You got scanners going on, you've got video technology, you got robots. So you're collecting all this data. I'm interested in the data life cycle. Can you explain a little bit about that end-to-end cycle?
So all the data, the data will come in from the edge, basically out in one of the ranges here now. Everything will come back to our core center, is analyzed, and basically pre-processed and sent back out to the growers to make an educated decision on what he is. So the growers basically are, as the outside world will call them, data scientists, looking at how to improve the product. So we bring it all in, analyze it. A lot of it's AI driven, a lot of it's video recordings. There's all kinds of different data that we are bringing in and making sure to use every day.
So can you talk a little bit about how this benefits your company? Again, I'm really interested in relative to traditional approaches. I mean, more yield, less space. How should we be thinking about this, Keith?
Yeah, so think about it this way, like we grow our greenhouse 12 months a year. So in Canada here now, like I actually grew up from a potato farmer. There's basically one big yield at the end of the summer, and that was your harvest for the year. We now harvest basically 12 months a year. We don't stop harvesting. We grow year round, and the yield is on average is 12 to 16 times per square meter of a conventional farmer.
Well, and of course, you're talking 50-foot tomato vines. I'm drooling over that stat.
Yeah, right behind me is, these ones are about 50 feet here now.
And everything's organic, right?
We do have organic ranges. We have 64 acres that is certified organic. But for the most part, we don't use pesticides within our greenhouse. We actually use good bugs to kill the bad bugs. So we actually have a whole BioScout division. We actually have an AI robot that's going up and down the rows to actually collect data and tell us what type of bugs are out there and what bugs to put back into the system to get rid of them. And basically, it's like a Jurassic Park type of scenario. We basically only have female bugs, and they'll die off, and we go from there.
That's awesome. So, you're talking about all this data before, this data lifecycle. How have you been able to respond for your business? I mean, a lot of businesses tell me we're very reactive. Are you able to be more proactive as a result of all this data input?
So, you know what? Back in the day, about 5 years ago, we really started to expand the amount of data we collected, and we really expanded it more than we ever had. And we kept growing and growing and growing. So I looked for a solution to help us be able to scale out in a better way for us and to avoid what I always called the 5-year refresh, where every 5 years we'd have to shut things down, move all kinds of things around, do all kinds of work to do it. So that's when we actually invested into the OneFS Isilon system to clear that up and to make it easier for us to move forward and scale out. Because that's the one great thing about working at NatureFresh is we always do something new and different. And around the corner is it never stops.
Well, so let's talk about your storage infrastructure. Can you paint a picture of the tech behind here, what experiences you've had, what makes it different?
Yep. So like we were the typical environment. We had a server that stored video, and then we had another server that stored more data. It was all unstructured data all over the places. You got to envision, we're 200 acres in Canada, 445 acres in Ohio. We had storage locations everywhere. And I looked to actually consolidate that and find a way that I didn't run into, hey, we've expanded this range now, we need more space. So we converted to the Isilon system to clear that up and allow us to store everything in one place. And what it allowed was it allowed our end users now to have one pane of glass to see all their data, one spot to go find every single file they did. But in the same time, it allowed me in the back end to clean it up, put the storage space where it meant to be. Like a file hasn't been used for 6 months, I put on slower data. For a file that's used every day, it's ran on the front end, ready for them to use. So it really helped clean up both my end and took time away from my team to develop it and clean it up. And it also made the end user experience 10 times better. And like I like to say, the end users noticed it right away how much cleaner and faster it was.
How about your thoughts on what Dell is announcing today? I don't know if you've had a chance to dig into it, but any initial thoughts?
Excited because, again, we're looking at we love to process things right at the edge. We don't want to do things way out on, bring it all back to the core all the time. We're looking to bring more things to the edge so that we can have that information cleaned up right for the grower right there at the section. Because still right again now, we're looking at expanding again and we have to bring it back to the core. We're looking at bringing things right to the edge and analyzing it right at that moment and turning our greenhouse into a proactive greenhouse instead of letting the growers be reactive. So we're looking at changing how we do everything, so having an AI decide everything for us and more be very proactive to what we're doing.
Yeah, so the topic today, of course, is unstructured data. So is that kind of what's next on your journey in unstructured? It's that sort of injecting machine intelligence, being more proactive. Anything else you can share with us on your aspirations for the near and midterm?
Yeah. AI is one of the biggest areas that we are really starting to look into now. Us and every partner out there that we talk to, that's the way we're going. Again, when you're trying to manage 160 acres at one time, there was a day 20 years ago that we started that you would actually basically need hundreds of people to manage this. Right now, a single grower sitting from his smartphone in Ohio can actually control every asset and every facet of even our Leamington operation and vice versa for both. It's not uncommon for our growers to go to Holland and Europe to actually see what's going on, and then they'll remote in at night and say, hey, we should change the setting here, and they can see every single part of what's happening within their greenhouse. So that way, it's a pure visibility, and it makes their life so much better. It just changed the way they worked.
Well, Keith, this is an amazing story. Thanks so much for sharing all these insights, and love the vegetables again. Thank you.
Not a problem. Thank you, and have a great day.
The way Nature Fresh Farms is able to use the power of PowerScale and OneFS to really, to create a 50-foot tomato vine, that's very impressive. So I hope to talk to you more. I'll be in the booth. I'll be here for questions. So yeah, please visit the Dell Technologies booth to ask any more questions about PowerScale or OneFS or Isilon. And thank you very much for attending this session. I hope you have a great day.